Hello everyone, I welcome you to the 8th episode of Conversation Corner, where we discuss and deliberate with the legal minds. Today we have with us a very special guest, Mr. Pratik Shankar, who is a managing associate at Talwar Thakur and Associates, Mumbai. I welcome you, sir, and thank you so much for agreeing to come overboard. Um, let's
Thank you
start.
so much, Vaishnavi.
Yes,
I
sir.
am delighted to be speaking on this forum, and I'm hopeful that this will be helpful to
Yes,
the
sir,
viewers.
surely, surely. Let me introduce our esteemed guest. Mr. Pratik is a corporate lawyer specializing in inbound and outbound strategic M&A, private equity, and structured financing. He has over 7 years of experience in dealing with a wide range of domestic and multinational corporations, private equity funds, banking, and financing institutions based in several jurisdictions such as USA, Germany, France, UK, Singapore, and Mauritius. His sector experience includes e commerce, education, financial services, real estate and infrastructure, pharma, healthcare, and industrial consumer. I'm sure there's a lot to add to this, sir, but due to shortage of time, we'll just start with the questions.
Sure, go ahead, shoot.
Moving ahead with our first question. What module your interest in law as a career? What is one thing that you believe law students should not give up in order to build up a career in law?
So this is something that I kind of this is an anecdote that I give in every forum that I participate in. Is generally is the first question anyone asks is what module your interest in law. So I think there's no rocket science there. I mean, I was always good at debating. I had a debating slash oratory mindset from
Yeah.
childhood. I used to participate in elocutions, etc. And then with something like this you have only two options: you either go to theater or you do law, because that those are the two kinds of career options which give you enough opportunity to speak out your heart and mind. I didn't want to do theater, so that's where I landed up. But then, interestingly and surprisingly, the field of law has evolved so much right now that it's no longer arguing in courts, but you can just simply be sitting at your desk and contributing to the corporate world as I am doing. And it's an equally enthralling and interesting area of law. And I think in terms of advice to law students who would want to pursue corporate law, or who should not give up, you know, the hope of building a great career in law, is to just keep persevering. I mean, hard work is something that you require in this field. I mean, you might get placed from campus or you may not get placed from campus. But irrespective, in both the situations, when you start at a law firm, you always start at zero, irrespective of whether you were a topper at college or where you barely managed to pass. So just because you might not be the brightest lot in college, never for a second think that you cannot excel in the field of corporate law or in the field of law for that matter. And just keep striving for it and keep working hard, and wait for the right opportunities to come your way.
Okay, thank you so much for your insight, sir. Moving on to the second question, specifically pertaining to the issues that we're facing in the current pandemic. What is the difference that you see from a client's perspective in the in the pre-COVID times and the post-COVID times in terms of deal making? For example, force major clauses, or specifically when we talk about M&A deals, the MAG clause has been of the utmost importance right now. So, from a client's perspective, what are they looking up to?
Yeah, sure. So that's a very good question, because the focus has dramatically shifted before, from in terms of what the key focus areas were pre-COVID and now what the focus areas are.
Exactly.
And because you've brought up two very important concepts, one is force majeure and the other is material adverse change. So I will just kind of demystify these two terms for you. So I think how force majeure is important, and in fact I would add a third term to it. It's called frustration of contracts.
Right.
So how force majeure and frustration are important in this present context is that now clients who are trying to enforce, how who are trying to enforce contracts in a court of law because their counterparty has defaulted on its performance obligations or, for example, payment obligations, are now revisiting their contracts to see whether it contained a force majeure clause or not. See, because you
Right.
can get a force majeure exception only if the force majeure clause is built into the contract. So that's where we are now coming in as lawyers. We are being asked to look into contracts again and, analyze the provisions to see whether there was a force majeure clause in there. And more interestingly, if the force majeure clause was in there already, does it only cover earthquake, fire, and cyclones, or does it cover something like
Correct,
a,
correct.
biological hazard such as
Yeah.
COVID-19 pandemic? So that's how force majeure has become important. Similarly, a lot of people are claiming that their contracts are frustrated because it's incapable of performing anymore. But there's now plethora of judicial pronouncement which says that your frustration of contract need not be a natural consequence of COVID-19, and it's something that you will have to establish before the court, saying that because of COVID-19 I am totally unable to perform my obligations in the contract. In fact, it is to the extent of being so difficult that it is nearly impossible for me to do it.
Exactly.
And just because the pandemic happened, I cannot take an undue advantage of this. And there's in the contract
True,
act, there's this
true.
doctrine against unjust enrichment. So you
Yeah.
can't unjustly enrich yourself. And again, material adverse change, yes. I mean, if there's a force majeure event happening, if there's frustration happening, then these kind of things trigger a material adverse change in M&A transactions and also in lending and financing transactions, if you will. And the focus has shifted because we are now being advised to look into these clauses and give the right piece of advice to the client on how they need to tackle these issues in a post-COVID environment.
Okay. Thank you so much, sir, for that advice. I'm sure it's going to help us during our virtual internships to even understand these concepts.
Sure,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Moving on to the third question. What books or reading material you would suggest for students who are interested in M&A? And what is your advice for students who want to take up the acquisition practice?
So I think when you say reading material for M&A practice, I mean the M&A practice is pretty diverse. It has various kinds of fields. You have domestic law. Then I mean I perhaps I can start with the basics first. And the most important act that you need to know by heart to do a corporate law practice. Surprisingly, it's not Companies Act. It's called the Indian Contract Act. So
Okay.
because essentially the core practice area in M&A is to draft contracts. So you should be absolutely sure of what the Contract Act provisions are and whether what you are drafting is enforceable under law or not. So that's Contract Act for you. Another basic legislation, of course, is the Companies Act and all the rules framed under the new Companies Act, and whatever amendments keep happening to Companies Act. Then I think particularly important from a cross-border M&A practice perspective, you should also know the Foreign Exchange Management Act. You should know FEMA by heart, and FEMA has various rules and regulations issued under it.
Right.
Most important of which for our practice, which governs FDI, is the Foreign Exchange Management Non-Debt Instrument Rules, which governs foreign direct investments in India. And you should also be aware of outbound investments where people from India invest in foreign
True.
countries. And for that, you have Foreign Exchange Management, Transfer or Issue of Foreign Security Regulations,
Yes.
2004. So I think these are the kind of reading materials. In addition to this, you should be updated in terms of whatever cases are happening on a day-to-day basis. You should read the commentary. Avtar Singh, for example, is a great commentary which gives you the evolution of corporate law in India and compares it with the corporate law in the UK, which is very similar. So I think these would be the core study materials. In addition, if you want to go for the financing practice, you should also be well versed with the Transfer of Property Act, Sales of Goods Act, and some of the other sector specific legislations. But I think if you do Contract Act, Companies Act, and the FEMA regs properly, I think then you're through.
Okay, sir. Thank you so much for the insight, sir. We've also seen that post-COVID times, a lot of cross-border transactions have taken place. See, for example, the Reliance and Facebook deal, which took place.
Mm-hmm.
So essentially, even looking at your profile, since you have experience of cross-border transactions, what is the approach in which a deal-making process involving domestic and foreign clients differ? So, in terms of compliances or in terms of law, like what is the major difference?
See, I think the single biggest difference between a domestic transaction involving two Indian parties versus a cross-border transaction which has investors from Europe or US is I think is that I think the level of sophistication. In one word, I would say
Yeah, correct.
sophistication. I mean, all
Absolutely.
the investors in a cross-border transactions, particularly from advanced jurisdictions like Europe and US, uh, they know what they are talking about, and when they are talking about warranties, they
Hmm.
exactly know what warranties they are looking for. They exactly know what are the kinds of disclosures and exceptions to those warranties that they are looking for. But in an Indian context, when you deal with purely domestic people, a lot of times, these investors or for that matter, business owners don't have too much experience in M&A transactions. So the amount of hand holding is very high. You need to sit with the client and try and explain or most of the concepts to the client. Whereas, when you deal with some of the most sophisticated jurisdictions, I mean, the discussions are more mature and the discussions are more
True.
specific. And the one other thing that I would definitely want to mention is I think compliance. From a compliance perspective, the European and US clients and investors are particularly uncomfortable with a lot of compliance issues coming up when they're doing transactions. But in
Right.
India, the compliance issues are generally discounted, and it's just saying that ये 19-20 का फर्क है चलता है. So that kind of an attitude doesn't
True.
work
True.
when you do a cross-border transaction.
Okay, sir. Thank you so much for your wonderful insights, sir. I mean, honestly, it's great to have these words from you. And thanks a lot for agreeing for this initiative. We hope that Legal Corner, like you stay associated with Legal Corner in future as well.
Sure.
I'm sure this is going to help our viewers understand few intricacies of M&A practice. Thank you so much, sir.
All the best to you and all your viewers. And I hope that I'll get to speak more on some of these issues and
Definitely, sir.
flesh it
Definitely,
out
we'll
in
get back
greater
to you.
detail for everyone's benefit. Sure. Let's
Thank
stay in touch, and
Yes,
thank
sir.
you very much for having me on board.